To order, roll call, please, Mary.
Supervisor Gens,
Here.
Nudo,
Here.
Geertsen,
Here.
Brookhouse,
Here.
Gama,
Here.
Yashki,
Here.
Kirby.
Here.
Youth and Governance member Charlotte
Here.
and Sasha.
Here.
Everybody is present. I think this is the first time. Very good. This time we'll open the meeting up to citizens' comments. Any citizens wishing to speak? Any citizens wishing to speak? Any citizens wishing to speak? Seeing none, citizens' comments are closed. Reports from the chair. I just want to take a minute and just kind of ad lib this, but everybody's probably aware we did get our bond rating back. And it did come back at AAA, which, I mean, right behind budget and bonding to me is a major goal for being a county board supervisor. I started this fight back in 2008. You've been fighting it longer. Other people have been fighting it longer, and we really finally got over the hurdle in 2021. And we reached AAA. We are one of only 7 counties that are AAA. And we've saved our constituents hundreds of thousands of dollars by being that fiscally responsible with our money. And I know that's a cliche, but it works in this case. So I really, I want to thank our finance department, the county boards, CABA, Ellers, everybody who participated and everybody who's fought the fight for the years. I think it's really worthwhile and we should be proud of ourselves for this. So I know in 2021, when I was sitting here, I was, and I still am. So that's all I have. Oh, I will bring up, we have a special meeting Tuesday at what time is it?
7:15.
Tuesday at 7:15 here
Yes. We will be in the auditor's room.
in the auditor's room
Legislative will be
at 7:15. Tuesday.
to approve the sale of the bonds.
We were to attend this Tuesday.
We have a finance meeting Tuesday at 7:15 to approve the bonds. Okay, approval of minutes, July 11th, 2024, joint meeting with Human Services and regular finance admin meeting. It's been moved by Supervisor Geertsen,
Second.
seconded by Supervisor Gashke. All those in favor?
Aye.
Did you vote?
Aye.
Okay. All right, that passes unanimously. Kava, second
Yes, sir.
quarter report. Yes, sir.
I don't have anything to say, but I think you missed the reports from supervisors. I don't have.
What do you got to say, Gabe?
Uh,
That was it.
I can't say
All right.
too much because.
I will go back in the agenda to number 4. Well, you gotta buy the first round. Number 4, reports from the committee. Anybody have a report? Anybody have a report? Okay, thank you. Moving on, Kaba, second quarter report.
Good evening. Brad Portillo with the Commercial Area Business Lines here to report on the second quarter loan activity. First I wanna start off and Supervisor Gens kind of stole some of my steam here, but wanted to congratulate this group as well as the county's finance department on retaining the AAA bond rating. It's a very big deal, something this group should be very proud of and take a lot of pride of. So, congratulations on that. And thank you for letting CABA be a part of that on the economic development portion of that presentation. We're always there to help. We're glad to help, but also grateful to be a part of that presentation. So thank you for that invitation. On the loan report, I know everyone is familiar with these reports by this point. There's not a whole lot of activity to report on in this quarter, so I'll maybe just speak a little higher level, but if anybody has any questions within the reports, happy to do so. First and foremost, there are no loans in arrears in this report, so any current loans within these funds, we do not have any payment issues to report on or to share with this committee. There was one loan payoff in Q2 that was within the EDA CARES revolving loan fund, and that was with Nexus Pharmaceuticals. as you may know, Nexus Pharmaceuticals was acquired. Their facility and equipment was acquired by the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly. And as part of that transaction, we had an equipment loan that was paid off. So you will see that note down to zero with a larger than normal repayment schedule in Q2. Other than that, no new loans in the quarter. I would just say loan activity has been slower. I don't think that it's unique to us. The kind of banking world is experiencing that as well. But I think that's okay. And I would just say, from our perspective, just because loan activity is slow doesn't mean it's a reason to reach and start participating in projects or deals that we normally would. We're making sure we're staying prudent with our loan funds and, engaging in projects that are good quality projects, and, just remaining disciplined to be good stewards on these funds on behalf of the county. In terms of rates, we're very competitive with rates. In a lot of cases, we can be below market in terms of the banking world or the SBA programs. We're going out and actively marketing that with a lot of our conventional lenders. That's led to some warm leads. I don't want to kind of overpromise to this committee, but feel pretty confident that we'll see some activity, some loan activity here coming up relatively soon. Some of these projects they're getting bigger and more expensive and just take a little more time to get across. But we've also retooled and revamped our business retention and expansion efforts quite a bit here recently. And a lot of times that can organically lead to some more loan activity as well. So my last comment, and then I'll answer any questions. I believe in Q2, we had our audit committee meeting. I think that was in April. I don't think that this committee has met since then. But we go through both we have a financial audit, which of course is financial accuracy, reporting, controls, etc., as well as a single audit component to it, where the auditors are reviewing more compliance items, and as it relates to this committee, specific to the loan funds. And are we administering the loan funds in accordance with our contracts? Are the terms, conditions, restrictions, eligibility, are all of those things being met? Happy to report that we got the clean bill of health there, unmodified opinion on both, so no issues to report. Of course, that's my expectation every year, but important nonetheless. So that's kind of my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee, Youth and Governance? Supervisor Gluckowski.
So why would companies come to CABA for loans? What's their motivation? What drives them to do that with you?
Yeah, so we're commonly referred to as a gap lender. So if you think about it, similar to if you're buying a house and you go to get a loan, and maybe the bank or the mortgage will only give you 80% of whatever the purchase price is. A lot of times these projects can be very capital intensive and cash, and these specifically manufacturing companies, a lot of times will want to hold on to their cash and deploy it elsewhere. So we will come in and help support a project and kind of extend over and above what just a traditional bank might do to help kind of push a project across the finish line. That's probably the number one reason. So if a bank would go to 80%, we might go to 90% or 95%. Then we kind of help the bank from they have a much safer collateral position, and it helps all parties involved.
So a hotel, I see there's you have loan money to hotel companies, right? Did I see that in there?
We have in the past, yes. It's not necessarily a targeted industry, right?
And is that saying that, let's see if I get back to you. So they take advantage of this because then they could use that, say, $1 million to do some other development someplace else, therefore not have to borrow so much on their own.
They could use their, excuse me, they could use their own cash to go do a project somewhere else, but the cash out
No,
of these
not what I mean.
funds,
Not what I mean. When you said they could use their, then they could save their cash and use their assets someplace else. Using that, so that. Just, I guess what I'm trying to get at is. It makes sense to me. That a company's coming in and they need some assistance to build out or whatever. But some companies might use this because maybe it's a better financial deal for them than in going and borrowing money on the open market, even though they could.
that is true in some cases, yes.
So I'm just wondering, is it wise to loan money to somebody that really doesn't need it necessarily? Do you work through that process and vet it out so that we strategically, these people can't do this without our help? Is that how it's done?
It's part of the equation. Yeah, there's a lot of variables to it, but in some cases, low interest loans are offered as part of a relocation or expansion kind of package, like into their capital stack to help push the project across the finish line. Okay, I don't know, does that answer your question?
I don't know.
Supervisor Brookhouse, I will also say, you're looking at it from a straight on linear approach where, okay, we borrow money to these people. Do they really need it? Should we save it for somebody who maybe really needs it? But what you also have to take into consideration are the jobs it creates and the other things that are around it that could help build us up in different ways. Help increase our tax base, increase the quality jobs that are in our area. So I would think there's different, I don't mean to speak for you, but I think it's not just a question of picking who we should, maybe they already have enough money, maybe we shouldn't loan it to them. Maybe we entice them to come here and bring their 500 jobs here and it helps Kenosha County. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of how I look at it as well. And CABA's been great at doing that over the years.
That's a good summary. It's like a specific example that would come to mind is like if a company wants to invest a good chunk of money into their employees for like training programs and in skilling and education, those things are very hard to borrow on. So where we can like shift money more toward equipment, real estate, things like that, more hard assets, that allows the company to kind of keep some of that capital for some of those things and like in tooling their employees.
I guess specifically when I went through this, it made perfect sense to me when I looked at or some industry coming in here.
Mhm.
But then my question really is about a hotel. Loaning money to somebody who brings a hotel in. And that's, to me, it maybe doesn't meet that hurdle that I'm thinking of. And that you just said.
I'll just say like in that specific example, I think that loan originated in like 2010 or 2011 where industry was like really slow. We're not getting, that's kind of like a legacy loan. We're not participating in like in a hotel project these days.
Right. I'm good. Understand.
Okay.
Supervisor Gearston, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So did you talk about the 1.1 million on the high impact?
Oh, I did not. I have in the past. So there's 1.1 million of commitments in the high impact loan fund that's 300,000 to a company called Concept Laboratories. It's coming from Chicago, Illinois, moving up into Pleasant Prairie. Actually, those loan docs were just signed today. And then the other 800,000 of that is for the West Rock relocation up here. They're establishing brand new 600,000 square foot facility on the old We Energies plant there. Some might know it as like the Dermody property site.
How many jobs?
Concept Laboratories is 177 and, you're gonna test me here.
That's okay. 100 jobs.
West Rock was 200-ish, 220.
I remembered it to be about 200,
Mhm.
220,
Yeah.
like the right number. I think that may be in the rating presentation. I don't have to
It
have that in
is,
my-
yeah.
It's hundreds of jobs.
Mhm.
Did that go out in the back at the rating presentation?
No, that will get sent out tomorrow.
Okay. So I wouldn't have seen it then, so
No.
I don't have to feel bad.
Nope, you didn't.
But so, and I know, and sometimes I participated in this, this discussion we were having with the supervisor, with Frederick, Supervisor Cookhouse. We're competing with other municipalities, and this 1.1 million helps us get, win that and get the hundreds of jobs. It's happened many times. I don't know if that happened with these. But
Yes,
they're usually looking around for the lowest cap rate, and we help them get down to their cap rate.
yes. So this high impact fund, I know I've said this before, but it's probably worth saying every time. Like, this is kind of like the deal closing fund. This is, like, I can't speak highly enough about how important and critical this tool is to have in Kenosha County's toolbox. Like, there's not a lot of communities that have this. This is oftentimes paired with, to your point, yes, very, very competitive projects. They're looking at Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, you name it, you gotta put your best foot forward. So yeah, this is instrumental and has helped us land countless projects over the years, yeah.
That was my question. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Public Works Resolution discontinuing former public right-of-way of a portion of Carroll Road change due to County Trunk Highway F project.
Thank you. John Moyer, Corporation Counsel's Office, asking for approval to discontinue the former right-of-way on Carroll Road. There was some materials handed out, due to that Highway F project. It resulted in a cul-de-sac being created, and there was no more ingress or egress to the newly constituted Highway F. As a result of that, and the cul-de-sac, there is a part of the former right-of-way of Carroll Road that is no longer a roadway. And Highways had asked that we discontinue that. To the east of this location, there's another road called Pond Road, which mirrors what happened on Carroll Road. There was a cul-de-sac created, and Twin Lakes, that was in Twin Lakes, as opposed to Town of Randall. The Pond Road right-of-way was discontinued by Twin Lakes. So they took care of that. In the case of the Carroll Road and Town of Randall, they did not want to do the discontinuance of the road. They asked the county to do that, which is permitted under chapter 230, I'll say it in here, chapter 236, I think it is. There's a statute that allows counties to do that. And so they asked us to do it, and we're directed to do that under a statute in chapter 66. So what I'm asking is that the committee approve the discontinuance of that little part around that cul-de-sac, which is no longer needed for roadway. And if there's any questions, happy to answer.
Supervisor Gearston.
I would move approval.
It's been moved by Supervisor Gearston. Second by Supervisor Kirby. Any questions or comments? I have one. So what's gonna happen with it after we discontinue that?
You know, there's two portions, and Normally, they would be equally divided between the contiguous landowners. In this case, we had a pre-existing agreement with Carl Carroll that the easterly portion, which he has property that's contiguous and his is actually in Twin Lakes. But the little remnant here is actually in town of Randall, but that he would be getting a portion of that that's a little bit smaller than the other crescent shaped part. And that part is part of a remnant that's been already approved for sale to Lance and Abby Gearing. So that other portion to the west would be combined with the parcel that's going to Gearing.
So it's just gonna be combined with the landowner and they're gonna take care of it.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, youth and governance? Everybody else?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Number 8, Public Works, resolution for agriculture lease agreement with Lois Brothers Farms for the purpose of growing alfalfa and hay for farming purposes within the area of Kenosha County Veterans Park, located at 8530 352nd Avenue, Twin Lakes, Wisconsin, 53181.
Thank you and good evening. As Supervisor again stated, this is for a lease agreement with Lois Brothers Farms. We've been doing such lease since 2016. It's renewed every 2 years. This lease would go through the end of 2026 and then come forward again to you guys if approved for 2027 through 2028. They ultimately cover roughly 27 acres of land in which they harvest and will offset us with bales of hay and or a monetary amount equivalent to. The benefit of this is not only does Lois Brothers receive materials for their farming, but Kenosha County also has this vast majority of land that they don't have or maintained because it is maintained by the Lois Brothers. That's pretty much the big overview of this resolution.
Supervisor Noodle.
Okay, you say 27 acres,
What's that?
about 27 acres,
Correct.
and what financial gain the county gets? They say paid by,
Yeah, they end up getting $143.98 if they aren't up to get to the 75 bales of straw, which I believe they always get the straw and use throughout the parks for various reasons. In addition to approximately $1,100 for the use of the property.
so altogether comes out to be what, $1,200 and some dollars
Potentially, yeah.
for 27 acres,
Plus the bales of hay.
which you say they pay some money if we don't get, how many bales?
Yeah, if we weren't to receive the full amount of their contracted bales of hay,
How many bales?
the 75, so
75,
yeah.
which, how much did they go? How much does one bale cost?
That I don't know. So the level 5 in the actual agreement says that the rent is a total amount of $143.98 or $17.08 per acre, or 75 bales of straw delivered to Kenosha County Memorial Park. So I guess you could put it at $17.08 per acre.
Per, which is pretty much nothing, right? So why are we doing?
The benefit, like I said, also comes off that, Kenosha County employees have to maintain any mowing or other activities that would be used on those 27 acres of land.
The land could be used for something else. It's right close to the park there or whatever, which.
Yeah, they put it in here. Yeah, the map kind of gives an overall page. What page it is in the resolution, but it's kind of an overview of what the land markings would be relatively around the lake. Or
That's a part of the Palmer Creek is that water.
okay.
I'm not,
I'm gonna say something too when you're done.
I'm not against releasing it, however, I think we should get some kind of a fair price at $17 an acre. It's a joke. It's nothing. So, that's it.
Supervisor Brickhoff.
Yeah, so in the past, I've walked this property extensively. Early on with this park, it was discussed about doing some preservation or restoration work on this park. Particularly in this northern part of these two parcels that you're talking about. And I think the county, 15 years ago, spent some money having some organization come in and reporting on how to restore this. And that was part of the conversation about originally buying this land. So, so what happens is, I think it's the Palmer Creek flows through here, and this is an old ditch. This water is right here, and then it flows out and towards the lake that's on this property. So personally, I don't have any problem with them farming this little section next to the dog park. But this thing, a strategy should be to do something to restore some prairie, restore this waterway, which was part of the original conversation when this park first was in the development stage. So to your point, it doesn't seem like such a good deal. And it is a park, and there's old trails all through this thing. My opinion is we should be talking about restoring that to prairie and fixing that waterway, taking all the non-native and invasives out of there and continue to improve this park. I'm done.
Okay. Anybody else? Supervisor Kirby?
Do you have an estimate on how much money we would actually be saving by not having to maintain this plot of land?
I don't have an estimate on it.
Probably a couple $100 for
It mowing and it, yeah.
To pay people
couldn't
to do it,
imagine
I
it
would
would be much
think.
if they're
Yeah.
running over
You
it.
know, I mean,
I agree with Supervisor Newdall. This is, we're basically giving the land away, which, I feel like we're really not getting maximum value for that land, and maybe use of it would be, maybe there would be better uses of it.
anybody else? Well, I think that we're the finance committee, and I mean, this is really a question that should be brought up with the parks department and committee. Public Works should look at whether we're getting a proper use, but we're not gonna use this. We would have to maintain it. So I mean, at the end of the day, I'm gonna support this because, while it might not be the best use in our minds, I don't know. But that's something that they can look at. But right now, we're being offered here, we'll maintain this and we'll grow some hay and wheat and alfalfa or whatever. And we'll pay. I know people who rent fields from farmers and stuff for little things and do their stuff. They don't pay a lot, because they take care of the property. So you guys may all have good points, and maybe, we can ask the Parks Department to look at it, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna support this because we're getting money for something we would have to maintain and use. And I don't have a better plan of use for it right now. So that's my opinion. Supervisor Geertsen.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval, and if I can get a second, I'll make a comment.
It's been moved by Supervisor Geertsen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Supervisor Gaschke.
And I'm not asking that this be embedded in the resolution, but I would request that the staff take the observations of committee back to Public Works and bring a report to the Public Works Committee that we could also see that ties into the questions with the preservation, with are we getting the value? I know bales are roughly like $10 a bale, all of that, get into the micro of the detail there, and then maybe sometime in the future before we re-up this lease next year, there can be some discussion. But I agree with Chairman that the Public Works Committee would be where that report is given. That concludes my comment.
Thank you, Supervisor Kirsten. Supervisor Gaskey.
Chris, you may have mentioned this and I might have missed it, but how long has a similar lease agreement been in place? Like how long has this party been leasing from the county?
I tried to look up the history of it. I can see it going back to 2016.
Okay, so this.
Yeah, coming up on 8 years. When this would renew, it wouldn't be next year, it'd be in 2 years and 26.
Yeah, that's right.
We would hit 10 years. But yeah, everything is noted. I will certainly go back. We'll have a conversation with the Parks Director, Public Works Director. See, is there better use? What's the equivalency of savings? What benefits is the farming economy also getting from this? And we can report back.
And then to your knowledge, maybe you don't know this, maybe this is a public works question, but has anybody else expressed interest in leasing this land? Have there been any other parties, that have created competition, so to speak?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I think I'm reading this correctly, the lease expires in 2026, so we have about 2 years to think of an idea of how to utilize this land. Alternative, in an alternative manner, so I'll definitely support this in the meantime. I yield.
Supervisor.
Well, I agree with the part where Public Works maybe should look what could be done or not. However, this is the Finance Committee. We gotta look at the financial benefits or disadvantages of anything. On 27 acres, how many bales can whoever is doing that, how many bales can they make?
And I don't have that answer. But
Okay, and which I'm sure, not a farmer, but it's a lot more than 75 or a couple hundred, whatever it is. And I believe Supervisor Kirsten mentioned somebody mentioned $10 a bale or whatever, which I'm not really sure what it is. So whoever is doing can sure pay a little bit more, and the cost by keeping it will be about $200 for the county. I believe that's what you mentioned before. Roughly, it's a
Yeah.
roughly estimate, a couple $100 for us to keep up, to cut the grass or do whatever. I don't think it's fair. What about if something else comes up and say, hey, and we're not doing just for a month. I know we did some leasing for the Christmas trees, whatever we call it, and Sheridan Road, but that's just a couple months, and it's something that's done, whatever. This is 2 years. If something comes up, well, what's gonna happen? So, and not knowing all those facts, I know we had a big discussion at the last board meeting, because we did not have any facts and a lot of things, and everybody was against that, So I'm gonna vote against it, or a list to send it back to. Actually, I'll make a motion to send it back to Public Works Committee to come up with the questions that we had tonight, or some of the questions.
There's a motion to amend this by Supervisor Nudo to send this back to Public Works. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Brookhouse. Questions or comments on the amendment? Supervisor Gaskey.
Are we under any type of a time crunch, or do we literally have 2 years to decide whether to extend the lease or not?
Yeah, I don't know for certain. I don't know if there is a time crunch. I would have to see when the other one was extended to. Now granted, this says May 1st of 2024, which is obviously passed and did not come to the board to be approved to then, so I would have to look at anything that relates into that.
The reason I asked that question is I'd be hesitant for our committee to send it back to Public Works. If it would jeopardize, something with the Lois Brothers Farm or something along those lines. If there's some type of a time crunch.
Anything else, Supervisor Gaskey? Supervisor Kirby.
So did they already plant and they're going to need to harvest? I mean, I'm assuming if they've been using this since 2016, that they've already planted their crops and have harvested.
I mean, granted now with all, I should have looked at when their prior lease expires. Now, I don't know if that was the end of 24 and this was to be able to do 2020.
I don't think they do their planting cycle by our finance.
No, they don't.
Okay.
No. I would guess that land is being used now.
I would have to think so.
Anything else? Well, while I don't disagree with Supervisor Nudo's path for this, I do think that we as a county, our finance staff and our public works would have entertained any better offers that we would have gotten. So to me, you look at a highest and best use for the land. And I don't know that we've had any other offers, and saving us $200 and giving us a couple $100. I mean, you know, maybe there is in the big scope of life a better way to use it. I don't know, but Public Works can look at that. At this point in time, I'm not going to support the amendment. I'm going to move forward with this. That is, as a supervisor, my opinion. Anybody else?
Roll call.
Roll call requested. Supervisor Garretson?
No.
Supervisor Kirby?
No.
This is on the amendment. Let me be clear.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes,
No,
No? Yes?
no.
No?
No.
I vote no. So that amendment fails. Now we're back to the original motion. And it has been moved and seconded to approve that motion. Any questions or comments on the original motion? Supervisor Kirby?
So after hearing everything, I think as you said, and as Supervisor Noodle said, maybe there are better offers out there. This is the offer we have. Given the available options, this is better than nothing, having to spend a little bit of money. So I'm going to vote yes.
I just want to make a smart comment. I want to sell my house. And, I've been
Give you
getting,
$75 a acre.
maybe I'll do it because I did not get a better offer. So the point I'm trying to make is we didn't get any offers because nobody knew about it. And this year we got it since May, something you mentioned, May
Yeah, it had
4th
mentioned
or whatever.
May 1st.
We're in August now. I don't know what kind of game is being played. And I said that before, but we wait till the last minute. And then we said, we don't have a choice. We gotta do this, we gotta do that. Why did they bring it to us before? And the thing is, if they're gonna do something where they're gonna see that I'm not a farmer, probably Fred knows more than I do on that, but that's not when they're gonna plan stuff now. They would have plenty of time.
Any other questions and comments?
Did I ask for roll call?
Not on this, you didn't.
I would request roll call.
Roll call has been requested on this agenda item. Supervisor Garretson,
I vote aye.
Supervisor Kirby,
Aye.
Supervisor Gavin,
Aye.
Supervisor Nudo.
No.
Aye.
I vote aye. Passes.
All right, thank you. And I will get some just backup information.
I would, as Supervisor Garretson said, I would just run this by Public Works and then have them give us a little report through Patty at the next meeting. Okay, just so we know whether there have been other offers, whether they feel that's the best use for the property, that type of thing.
Yeah, we'll do.
Thank you.
Really the price breaker too.
Sheriff, repurpose capital funds, Sheriff's Mobile Command Center radio antenna upgrade.
Mr. Chair, board members, how are you tonight? I bring with me our new fiscal service manager, Kelly Clark. So
Hi,
I'd
Kelly.
like to introduce you guys. So, this letter is to advise that we need to so in our 5-year plan for the last 10 years, we've had the mobile command upgrades. So that was about $180,000 that we had allotted for the mobile command upgrades. Well, with new eyes and new bids, it's really only $20,000 that we need to upfit the for what we really
I like those eyes.
like that. So with some of the money, obviously you guys know that we've had a problem, buying trucks. I was just interviewing.
Don't get me started. Did you see how fast my head popped up, Andy?
Said that.
So.
Wise guy.
We had some difficulty in getting squad cars over the shortage of chips and whatnot, you know. So we're 20 squad cars behind our annual rotation. We have now found dealerships that have plenty of stock for us that other, so what happens is we put in orders just like every other agency. Those orders are not filled because they go out and look for them everywhere else, right? So there's an abundance of squad cars down in the Chicagoland that we were able to fulfill a lot of our squad cars. We're still have 533,000 that is allocated to complete our motor vehicle purchases for this year. But we're asking to, we're requesting approval to repurpose 20,000 of that to fix the antenna on the mobile command squad. So what happened this year for Country Thunder, we borrowed their repeater. It's a repeater antenna for radio communications. We borrowed that from Marathon County. So they were grateful enough to actually bring it down, set it up for us and come and pick it up. So this 20,000 would be
No, it's,
used to update that equipment.
yeah, I can.
Just to answer any questions you might have.
Questions or comments from the committee? Well, I have a couple.
All right, I knew you would.
Let's, just to fill the new people in, I've had a running debate about the need for trucks as opposed to squad cars. So, and it's a
Are
joke,
we taking?
but anyway, so why did you bring up your vehicle problems in this?
That's where the money is allocated in this.
The 180 was allocated to,
No, so that I'm just telling you that for the last 8 years that I've been involved in the budget, that 100, it started at 120, it ballooned to 180. So it's been in our 5-year plan for our budget, right? It always gets cut because there's other things that we need more so than an antenna, right? So like I said, new eyes, new ears, everything went out. And so a part of that $180,000 to upgrade the SMC, not only the antenna, but they were looking at putting high definition cameras all around that thing, like a spaceship, right? It really isn't necessary. That's not what we need right now. We need the mobile, the telecommunications out at Country Thunder or whenever we deploy that for an emergency.
I agree with you 100%.
So the 180s.
Where did the vehicles come in? Was that just to like put in the back of my mind that you're gonna ask for money for vehicles? I'm just struggling to understand here.
That's where the monies are allocated, right? So we're asking to take $20,000 of that money that is allocated for fleet vehicles to pay for that.
I thought you just said it was in 180,000 of a fund for the
No.
antenna.
They've been planning it, but it's not been in the
Yeah.
approved CIP. Just that they knew this was out there, it was gonna come forward. It might have even been on the 5-year. I'm
Yeah,
not
it
sure.
explains-
on the 5-year
That
plan.
That explains it. Oh, I get it. Okay.
I didn't mean to
Thank
scramble
you.
your brain.
And it's kind of easy to do sometimes. It just depends. But I appreciate that. You threw me off with the truck comment.
Sorry.
That just put me over the edge. All right, I have no problem with that. Any other questions or comments? Supervisor Nudo had his hand up first, then you, Supervisor.
Can we talk about trucks for a while?
No, I didn't take enough blood pressure medicine.
Okay, then I don't have anything to say.
Supervisor Geertsen,
I would move approval and then I have a question and comment.
it's been moved by Supervisor Geertsen to approve this $20,000, seconded by Supervisor Kirby. Supervisor Geertsen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the chief deputy. This is a critically important asset, is it not? I mean, is this used as a backup for our 911? This is,
It's a mobile 911 center. So like at Country Thunder, our telecommunicators are in that mobile command along with our command staff.
I mean, this is really important. Am I wrong?
No, this is extremely important and, telecommunications, the radio frequencies change so often, right? Back back in the day, right? 8 years ago, when we put this into the budget, we had what was called the ACU 1000. That was a camper that had all these radio frequencies in it. That thing is obsolete now, right? So every year WEM gives us a repeater. So this is how we've been band-aiding it. They borrow us a repeater, but it just happened that Country Thunder and the RNC just coincided at the same time. So there was no repeaters available. So I reached out to the chief deputies across the 72 counties, 71 besides us, and Marathon County offered us their services for us. So this $20,000 just allows us to not have to beg, borrow, and pilfer from WEM or any other county.
And it's not a Band-Aid approach. This is,
This is a full fix. This will
Okay.
be, well, until they change the frequencies again, then we'll come back and ask for more.
I know our chairman and our committee is happy to support you. So to make sure that this asset is ready for you on routine work and emergency work. This is really important. And then the comment or the question through chair to finance director. This is just in the committee, right? We're done after this. Okay, I yield.
yeah. I strongly believe in proper communications for command and control units. So like, it's a no-brainer for me. But any other questions or comments? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. I will say, going back to that, not that I have any questions or comments on that, but this vehicle thing, now that you've perked my interest and you're way behind, I need to know about that. So hopefully, I
We're
don't know
not
if
way
that's,
behind anymore. So I guess that was part of the communication. We found lots of vehicles. We have 7 vehicles that we have currently on order to catch us up to the end of this budget.
okay,
Right? So
See,
if
now-
Ewald comes through with those 7, we're good.
okay. In the future, start off with the feel-good stuff.
I did.
Okay, all right.
As long as you're,
All right, number 10, sheriff report on overtime and federal inmate.
as long as
Yes,
you're going backwards,
I always go back.
I'm gonna go backwards, if I may, sir.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll supply 75 bales of straw and take over the
Oh,
27.
God. All right, thank you Supervisor Brookhouse for that insight. Moving on, overtime and federal inmate.
Fun stuff. I think it'd be easier. I mean, what do you,
All right, I asked this to be on there because of the new members of the committee. We've, for years and years and years, been getting revenue to house ICE inmates and Marshall inmates. And that has changed over the years, but it's always been a piece of our budget because it's been a big chunk of revenue. So what I want to know going into the budget is where our numbers are at. I want you to give a little history to the new members on the committee of when it started, what we've had, what kind of income, what we're down to as far as numbers now and where we're going. There's always been talk about, oh, we should, do away with counting on this revenue. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me because you should count on any revenue you can get. So, but anyway, I think this is a big part of how we budget
Sure.
and the sheriff's department. So that's the first thing is the inmates. Overtime, I'm looking for a number. I'm looking for a number and I'm looking for how that's a whole nother. Let's do the inmates first.
Let's start with
because that'll- yeah, right.
the federal inmates. So federal inmates, I don't know, 2000, 2002, maybe that when we got ICE detainees, when we.
Yeah, it was right around then. We had a
Yeah.
new executive elected in 98. And then shortly after that, we started the ICE program.
So we have ICE detainees, US Marshal, we had ICE detainees, we have US Marshal inmates. That rate was $70 a day, 30, and then the transport cost is the only thing that's changed. But so $70 a day to house an INS detainee or a US Marshal inmate. So that was, I would say, let's just say 2000 for clean numbers. I got hired in 2002. We had ICE detainees. 2019, 2020, COVID hits. There's a lot of issues with ICE and their rules and how they want us to house them, how they want us to transport them. It was just a bad system brewing, and we eventually came to the agreement with everybody at the table, the county board, everybody involved, that ICE would come and pick up their detainees. It just wasn't worth the headaches. We were 30 plus FTEs down in the jails. We were trying to find HR and myself, I was the captain of detentions in late 18. But we were trying to come up with a new schedule to force multiply our current staff. So we went to the 12-hour shifts. You need less staff to run a facility with 12-hour shifts than you do if you're running 8-hour shifts. So we were trying to come up with solutions. It had nothing to do with ICE detainees, but it's part of the equation, right? We didn't have a lot of staff. So $70 a day was the rate for 20 years. 24 years, because the sheriff just negotiated a new rate. The negotiated rate now is $105 a day. We are equal to the highest county in the state of Wisconsin for U.S. Marshals. Everyone knows how I feel about it. I still think it's low. But that was the only rate that they could negotiate, that the girl could negotiate, the young lady that was on the phone could negotiate without it going to Washington DC through a full committee, right? So 105. Transportation costs prior to us renegotiating, or the sheriff renegotiating, was $37.34 an hour. So anytime we transport a U.S. Marshal detainee, it takes 2 deputies. That is the law, that's the rules, policies. You need 2 deputy transports. So 37.34 is what what we're reimbursed on those deputies' wages, straight time or overtime. So if our deputies are out there on overtime, they're only being reimbursed at straight time.
Supervisor Kirby.
So is that per deputy, the 37.34 per deputy per hour?
Per hour.
Okay.
That's
So
74.
the current overtime rate is $86.91. So you can do the math of what we are in the negative. So on a regular shift deputy, it's a $14.29 an hour hit when we're outside of the facility with that inmate, which happens more frequently than we like. That includes transports or anything else. So today's rate's 105 a day. As of August 1st, that's in effect. The transport rate is up to $47.95. So we got the max that they were allowed to negotiate without it going through some 6-month grievance process. So I think the sheriff did a good job. He was way more patient than I would have been. So I give him all the credit. He's not here, but he does get a lot of credit for that. So currently, our projected census for this month is 30 U.S. Marshals. So now if you bring yourself back to 2019, when we had ICE detainees, we were housing roughly 200 to 250 ICE detainees. So you can do the math. That's quite a large bit of revenue source. We are projected for the rest of the year, I would say August through December, 40 to 50 U.S. Marshal inmates. So.
We're at 30, you're
We're at
projecting
30,
40 to 50.
So
Is that to hit our budget?
I don't know where would we be with projections? Are we
Probably
projecting pretty close?
Yeah.
Plus, with the increase, but here's the thing, when we were negotiating, there's a lot of consternation between the marshals and us, right? It's very sensitive subjects, and so they were pulling back. They weren't pulling people out of our jail, but they also weren't sending us a lot of new bodies. That's starting to pick up again now that we're all.
Okay.
We've signed a marriage certificate and.
How the problem started. That was the wrong thing to say.
So they're coming back to our normal census for marshals. So that's that's kind of that in a nutshell. Is there any other questions?
What was our budgeted number this year?
I
Per month.
think it was,
Oh,
per month.
So didn't we break it down per month or did we do it per year?
I know what.
It's probably
the
an average per
I
year.
don't know if you would have the detail of what your projections brought you to the budget. I think the annual was 1.2 in 2024. 2025, it's really too soon to be
That's all.
projecting that out.
I'm sorry, IT, I don't have it with us. This is just our expenditures. I don't have the revenues with us.
Right.
Excuse me.
Oh, Matt might have it.
Budget for 2024 is 1.45.
Of revenue? Do we know where we're at now?
For Q1 and Q2, it was 444,000. Based on a 40 census, we're projecting about 700,000 for the remainder of the year. It brings us in still under budget. Now, if you're saying 40 to 50, we did
Yeah.
projections on 40.
Yeah, I think it'll go back up to what it's normal. And you tell me, what were we before the,
We were in the forties. I mean, I think our daily average, we're still at 30 something.
I think, again, historically, we've been closer to that 50 range.
Plus, we're gonna get more money because of the increase too, because that starts in August.
Right. That projection factored in the increase
Yeah.
starting August.
Supervisor Kirby?
So does the daily rate that we receive cover variable costs related to housing these inmates?
It's always the $1 million question. Yeah. So typically, I think we try to figure out an equation of what it costs to house an inmate with electricity, food, blankets, inmate clothing. I mean, you name it. And we've never been able to really put a number on that. That's higher than the state rate. So the
Yeah.
state rate is at 55 right now. So if we house state inmates, $55 a day. It's
Oh.
So the federal inmates, you gotta remember, they're at a higher level of security, right? So when they're behaved, they cost less, right? But when they're not behaved, that's when they cost more. So, does $105 cover everything, the totality of everything? When you're talking about the rate of pay of your correctional officers and things like that, I would, again, my opinion is no. But I think the biggest issue for the marshals and for us is the transportation cost, right? Because a lot of our costs are done on overtime because we are 6 deputies short right now. We have 6 deputies short, and always our short goes into the jail, right? Our conveyance unit is the ones where our FTEs are held open because we need to make sure there's deputies out on the street. So the overtime is then pushed to that unit, and that's who takes those inmates to and from medical appointments or to and from Chicago or Milwaukee.
Anything else, Supervisor Kirby? Any other questions, comments? I think it's great that we got it up to 105. I mean, it's been stagnant since I've been on the board. So I mean, any increase is a good increase. I'm surprised by how low that number is, but I mean, as long as we're gonna hit our budgeted amount or very close to it, and we'll see next year what the budgeted number comes in, but we'll have to analyze that. That's kind of why I wanted the report on there, so you get an idea of what we're looking at when we're bringing this revenue item forward.
I mean, just as a historical number, back in 2017, this line item budget actual was $6.3 million.
Yeah, don't depress me. Yeah, I know.
Now, keep in mind, there was also variable costs involved with that, there's
Yeah.
salaries, there's more additional food, additional everything. But that was, when they walked out the door, that was not a fun day.
well, thanks for
It wasn't a
your
fun
time
day
tonight.
for you guys.
But actually, I mean, we've had the debate over how to handle that loss in income, in revenue, all these years, and now we've been forced to do it. It's almost like Chrysler leaving Kenosha. We've been forced to diversify.
Yeah.
We've been forced to figure out where to get that revenue. So, I mean, I just, it's still a piece of revenue and I wanted it brought up and, I mean, it's actually probably good that we're weaned off of that and we have to figure it out later. So, I mean, that being said, thank you for your report. Now we'll get on to the perpetual problem of overtime. And I've been dealing with this since I was on the board, back in 2008, and there have been different kicks at it and trying to understand it. And I think we're just looking for some type of number. It's always, well, we had to move this over here and do this over here and do this over here, and I could never follow it. And so I'm looking to get a number for overtime and see if we can stick to that so that you know what the expectations and the accountability are for. And, obviously overtime is something we can't avoid.
Right.
And I'm not, the reason it's on here is not to point fingers and say that, it's way out of control. I just want to know what you're doing about it, what the plans are, where we're at, see if we can get a number for it, help us with our budgeting tools in the future.
Thinking like 10 million. All right, so three. See, it sounds better, right? No.
Yeah, way to start on a positive note.
So in April, we met with the county exec and the finance team. I don't remember. HR was there. A lot of meetings. There was concern because we're short-staffed, right? We're short-staffed in the deputy arena for the first time in my career, that we have open deputy spots that aren't being filled. That's always been historically the jail, right? Our detentions division. So 22, 23, we were 20 plus FTE short in the jail. Right? We are now, knock on wood, and overhires. So we're having difficulty getting them actually off of training before they quit, or so the overtime is still prevalent. Training all those individuals costs money, right? They get the FTOs get an hour and a half of overtime per shift every time they're training somebody. So the overtime, so what we did after that April meeting is, my captains will tell you, anytime anything's asked for extracurriculars, dog and pony shows, we didn't participate in National Night Out for the first time in 20 some years on overtime, like no overtime. It was whoever was available that was on shift, you can go. My favorite story is when the sheriff is at one of the parades and the county exec's all excited it's a parade, right? And she's like, hey, where's Deputy Friendly? And he goes, this is what it looks like when we don't have overtime. Where's the honor guard? We don't have overtime. We can't spend the money on overtime. So a lot of our promotional events have not been happening, right? There's things that we have to do, right? We've gotten to contract disputes, if you will, with townships about providing extra security at parades, right? And we were charging them for the parade overtime. So this year it was determined that we wouldn't charge them this year because we hadn't in the past, but we will in the years future. So, in the jail, if someone calls in sick and there's an ability to collapse a zone, we collapse a zone, which just puts the onus on more duties for those that don't call in. We do the same thing out on the road. As long as it's not a safety hazard, we will, if there's a village squad in that area, then we'll collapse that area and not have that filled by overtime. So we've been doing everything in our power to eliminate non-mandatory overtime, if that makes sense. But it's still there. I mean, the amount of people, again, 6 deputies down is a lot. So our patrol overtime, has gone up based on those numbers. You can see, like in 2020, we spent a little over 900,000, and 23 we were at 1.275 for patrol overtime. So
just patrol overtime?
Yeah.
Full blown overtime?
But that's just patrol. So if you look at, as you recall, we got extra detectives in our last year's budget, right? In 2020, when we weren't fully staffed in the bureau, 116,000, now that we have those extra detectives, last year was only $58,000 in overtime. So there's more, when you're at full staff, that number is gonna go down. Is there still gonna be overtime? 100%, there's gonna be overtime, but unfortunately, not being able to fill all of our full-time employment spots, that creates overtime in itself.
What were the last 5 years of the overtime number? Total overtime number.
Last 5 years, so 2019 was 3.3, 2020, 2.1, 2021, 3, 22, 3.6, closer to 3.7, and 23 was 4.19.
So it's been going up.
It's, yeah, that's.
Now, 2020, I would say was an anomaly,
Yeah.
so you may not want to factor that into your,
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's still been going up.
it has been going up, but before 2020, a lot of the overtime had to do with the jail, ICE inmates, and we always felt that there was an offsetting revenue. When the census of ICE inmates was higher than had been budgeted, there was additional revenue that offset that overtime. And we had done analysis on that in the past. When the ICE inmates left and the overtime continued, there's also vacancy. So when they're down 30 correctional officers, the salary line for regular wages is down, the overtime is up. Not a perfect offset,
Yeah.
but there is some there.
in
So-
21, and I think of 2020 and 2021 with COVID, we weren't allowing all arrests into the jail. We were only allowing felonies and domestic violence type arrests. So the jail overtime was down in those years. Well, now we're back into running things, you know, the way they always had been, right? And if you think about some of the events that have happened since the civil unrest, right? The parades that in Highland Park, all those type of events, right? It's more, we're being more proactive in putting quick response teams at these events. That costs money. Those are all overtime folks, right? So the cost of being safer, right? Making sure that our communities are safer, making sure those events for our citizens are safer, comes at the expense of overtime at times. So those were those hard conversations that we had with Sumner, and I'm sure Mr. Geertsen heard about them, right? It wasn't popular for us to go in there and say, hey, look, we're on an overtime crunch. We can't provide you with the security that we have in the past without you paying for it. And it's the tune of $2,500 to $2,700 per parade, you know? So, I don't have any rainbows and unicorns news for you, unfortunately, in the terms of
I think you need to
overtime.
work on that.
I will.
Okay. I just want to say, let's have a little bit of a discussion on down these deputies and down these corrections officers. I understand from Chair and Joint Services, you know, with 911 and how training them, and I understand the cycles. Okay, you're under brutal cycles of it taking X amount of time, and which you can't speed up, I wouldn't think. You've probably already looked at making it go as fast as it can, getting them out there, but quitting before they start or whatever. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on what we need to do? Because I think my goal is not to eliminate overtime. It's to reduce overtime as much as possible within what we have to work with. So what are your thoughts on that? How can we deal with this?
Well, it's the retention piece, right? I think officer wellness is super important in our profession. I think last year at the budget, I came to the board and asked for some wellness money for wellness days in our budget that was cut, right? There's certain supervisor that was firmly against it. He's no longer on the board. But the retention piece is more important. Like, we focus so much on recruitment, right? We're recruiting, we're squeezing blood out of a turnip with recruitment. We are getting 60 to 100 deputy candidates. Now, 20 years ago, that was 2,000 to 3,000 candidates. So in deputies where we're short, we're getting a lot of correctional candidates. We're able to onboard them, but it's a different environment, right? I mean, you're talking, it's the hardest job, and I've said this since I was the captain of detention. That's the hardest job in this profession. They are with those inmates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they're working 12-hour shifts, and, you know, it's inmate management. They're there for safety and security. It's a hard job. There's COVID right now running through the jail again. So these officers are getting sick working at work. So they're calling in, which causes that whole overtime. So how do we fix it? I always said, as soon as we figure out how to fix the retention problem in the jail, we should all go buy lottery tickets that day, and we will probably win. It's not, there is nothing out there. Research after research after research is trying to figure out how do you retain employees in that environment, even in law enforcement in general. 2020 changed our whole world, right? And even in the jail, because they went through COVID, right, worse than we did, and we went through the civil unrest. So it's just changed the atmosphere of our profession. It's just different. I train at the academy. It's a different generation of recruits, both in the jail and in the sworn side. Then they're driven by other things. They're not driven by what I was driven by or what my counterparts were driven by. Like, we want a pension, we want insurance when we retire, all those things. They're not driven by those things. They're driven by the now. So how do you capture that in government, really, with the now? How do you capture that? Like, how do you give them, how do you incentivize their work or their, we've talked about, I mean, Claire knows, I've talked to her for the last 8 years about what can we do? Like, how can we, what can we do to make it better? What kind of things can we give them? We can't give out monetary prizes because apparently that's illegal.
Is it really? That was gonna be the first thing I suggested. Is it illegal? Is it legal?
Monetary prize.
Well, a bonus.
No, well, bonuses are, but
okay.
You came to work for 5 days in a row. Congratulations.
Okay.
But they don't really want money. They want time off, right? And time off costs vacancies and it costs overtime. So it's this loop that, it's like Groundhog out there. You just wake up and the same things happen all over again.
So we're 30 down there?
No. We were. So that the 21 through 23, there's vacancies galore over there. I don't have the clear numbers. So you have them?
We're over at 5 right now.
So we have 5 plus 5 correctional professionals. So they're going, yeah, absolutely. It's really good.
Does that, you foresee that bringing down that $4 million in overtime?
We're not projected to hit 4 million this year, are we? I mean,
First and second quarter, you're at 1.9.
so that's way under 4 million.
It's halfway through.
Somebody give him a calculator so he can get on board with this here.
$200,000 under, we're good.
Okay, and how short are you on deputies?
6.
6.
Yeah.
And you're 5 over on that. I mean, that should fix a lot of this overtime problem.
If we can stay at that correctional officer overhired number, right? I think we just, for the first time, we talked about September, we're not gonna have to start any new hires. Right, September,
Correct, September 30th.
So September, we are not, first month, probably in the last 5 years that we will not have a correctional professional.
Are we still going out and soliciting them, and are we still putting them through the program? Are we still, I mean, we're still getting applicants and
Yep.
keeping the cycle going, right?
Yeah, evergreen. We'll never stop doing evergreen hiring. So,
And
here's the thing, you think about, I talk about the mental health needs of my employees. If you think about those training officers, right? They haven't had a break in 5 years. So we onboard new training officers. But I can tell you that those ones that have been training for 20 years are extremely, extremely burnt out. So you know, and that we, again, those are things that we try to rack our brain, dinners, food, you know, whatever we can do for them, you know. So it's not in my budget this year, but I promise you that in 2026, it will be a mental health executive director for the sheriff's department. So I still have to be real lean this year.
You're gonna say something?
I was just gonna say that the class and comp helped to bring that 30 vacancies to the 5 overriders. That was huge. That was really, really important. But the fact that they're leaving before they're fully trained, that turnover means there's still overtime because they're not independent. So we're not getting the benefit of them yet. If they could stay past that, if they
Yeah.
got trained and stayed
And
on,
then a 2-year retention stipend. I can't call it, I don't know what it's called. I always say
Do
stipend.
we have that?
Oh, don't currently.
The-
So we have been in an overhire situation for a while now. Class and comp did, help us there. We've also changed the way we recruit. It's a constant recruitment. We don't, plan a test months out. We have it constantly cycling through. The staff that's dedicated, the sheriff's department, along with HR, doing a great job of that. But as Patty said, they do have to be trained. So, to get to the point of where they're independently on the job, is critical for us, and retaining them. It is difficult work.
It's very competitive still out there. DOC is paying outrageous amounts of money to pull people away, right? And I just was sitting through an LESP, so there's been some legal issues with putting deputies in the jail. So, because they're not certified jailers, right? So luckily, we did not have to resort to putting our deputies in our jail. But if you look at Milwaukee County, they threw 20 deputies in the first round. They have 40 deputies in the jail right now, because nobody wants to work for Milwaukee County Jail. So, and they're having problems because they have to rotate those people out, those deputies out now every 12 months because they can't get, unless they duly certify them, which costs money, right? So, so retention is the key word. How do we retain our employees? And I'm always welcome to have any conversation with anybody that's willing or knows a trick of the trade or has some great ideas, because I mean, like I said, I've researched, I've read as many articles as there is on it, and we can't do things like Fortune 500 companies do. I can't bring them all to Napa Valley for a retreat, but I'd like to.
Supervisor Kirby,
Supervisor Kashke, just hand it.
Supervisor Gashby.
Thank you. 2 questions. If we're 5 over on our correction officers,
Mhm.
is it a shorter on-ramp to have a correction officer become a sworn deputy? Would that be a way to, fill some of those vacancies?
No.
No, okay.
So we do it, they do get preference points if they're correctional professionals. So the process for deputy is still pretty convoluted, and we've tried to streamline it as much as we can with keeping the ethical core of our process intact. There's a lot of agencies within the state of Wisconsin and Illinois that have like cutout testing, psychological, it's whatever. We're not doing that, right? We don't need the ethical dilemmas on the back end. So the answer is no.
Okay.
But we'd love them to be deputies, but then it still creates an opening in the detention world.
Sure.
But we'd love to bring them in homegrown from our own agency, obviously.
And then my second question is, how does our sheriff's department compare our vacancy rates to surrounding communities?
We're pretty similar to, even KPDs in the double digits. So if you look at ratios, we're pretty good. Pleasant Prairie is probably the one that's doing really the best, because they take lateral transfers and they take them like, there's no testing, there's nothing. They just like, all right, you're a cop, you have a clean background, you're starting on the road tomorrow. I just got back from Badger State Sheriff's Association. This is a problem throughout the 71 other counties. We're not unique other than the young lady from Florence, the sheriff has 24 employees. So I was asked if she had a chief deputy opening. There's 7 inmates. I was like, that's awesome. She gave the one inmate a fish fry because he cleaned up poop. So I was like, we can't do that. That's every day. But yeah, that was her claim to fame. It was awesome.
Thank you. You
Yeah,
Supervisor
yeah,
Kirby, then Supervisor
Yes.
Cisco.
So has anybody looked at if retention bonuses would be less expensive than training all these new employees? Because that does work.
I'll
You
let
know.
Clara speak because she doesn't like when I talk about bonuses.
So a significant piece of retention is having successful recruitments of employees who fit that type of work. So one of the things that happens when you recruit constantly and at the pace that we've been doing, sometimes you bring aboard folks where it just isn't the best fit for them, and they are offboarded appropriately. So, yes, incentivizing strong, skilled, quality workers to stay, but also making sure that those are the folks that we're bringing on.
And there's also a problem with equity there, right? Because now I'm gonna give the 2-year employee a retention bonus for staying for 2 years, while the person that's just been training for the last 20 gets nothing,
Yeah.
right? So it's not a one size fits all. There,
Yeah.
in the reality, everything costs money, and our budget's always the most fun, so.
I look forward to what your number will be for overtime in
Am I
the
next?
next budget. Supervisor Brookhouse.
So, okay, all things being equal, Kenosha County, Racine County, everybody's having this competitive problem of retention or getting these officers, right? So probably around us, similar things are going on. You probably agree with that?
100%.
Okay, so that means we have to do something different. And, you know, in the world I came from, when we identified that we had to do something different, we got people together and we did some half a day of creative thinking of new ways. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what are some creative, and this is just ideas, right? You know, maybe we do something different than other people are doing, such as maybe offer childcare support, maybe a housing allowance, you know, things that would be set us apart. So we would be attractive, more attractive than all the counties around us. Just an idea.
Something that's always out on the boards of the childcare thing is really, like always out there is one of those benefits that every county is always looking like, can we do this? Should we do this? Cause that's one of the biggest things with 24/7 operations, right? Offering childcare during third shift hours isn't something that's readily available. So not that I'm volunteering to open a
So you don't
childcare,
do it?
however,
We don't do it, I take it?
we do not. And I'm sure there's, from the things I read from the other chief deputies, it's a lot of red tape for counties because there's insurance issues and
Liability.
facility issue. I mean, again, not my game, but there has been a lot of talk in that throughout the other chief deputies of the other counties, that's one of those things that a lot of counties are trying to see how they can we get there, you know, but it's a tall task. It really is.
Any other questions or comments regarding this issue? All right, well, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again, but thank you very much for your update. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Number 11, Human Services opioid spending and use.
No, or that you leave actually.
That was a little harsh.
I don't have feelings too.
So Perry and I spoke, and I'll start with the finances. If you take one and pass it down, I think you're gonna have There are 2 pages to this. Depends on the. So what you have before you on page 1 is a summary of the opioid funds that we have received. And the expenditures that have been made. The revenues also include interest revenue, and this is through August 6th. So in 2022, we started to receive opioid settlement funds from mainly Janssen and the distributors. And then in 2023, we received money from the distributors and then Mallinckrodt from a bankruptcy. And then in 2024, we've continued to receive money from the distributors, and now pharmacies are on board as well. The opioid settlements are structured to be a payout for a period of time. Janssen front-end loaded there. So the first 5 payments were all made in 2022. So that's why that's a really large number. And there's nothing in 23 or 24. I think that picks up again. But a much smaller dollar amount. What we found in 24 with the pharmacies is, certain pharmacies also front-end loaded. So Walmart paid their entire amount. They could have spread it out over several years, and I think 6 years was theirs, and they paid it all at once. So in 24, we got a larger chunk than we expected. Not that we really wrapped our heads around exactly, but the second page will go more into what the projected revenues are. There are still things out there that we don't know. So bankruptcies, that's the big area. The big one just in the news, Purdue. It was supposed to be like a $6 billion settlement. Our calculations were, we would get about $1.5 million to $2 million. That got thrown out of bankruptcy court. So we don't know where that's gonna land. So that's not in any of my projections because I don't have a number to draw from. Some of the other bankruptcies, we've just been notified about one, and I haven't been able to get enough information. All we received was a notice. We didn't receive, this is what you're gonna get. We don't know the period of time it's supposed to be paid over. So the bankruptcies have not been as clear as some of the other settlements have been. As I said, page 1, you can see that so far we have received $4.7 million. Interest revenue is $181,000. And expenditures are listed below, and Carrie can get into exactly what makes up those numbers, but the prevention educator between 23 and 24 has totaled $122,000. High school training, $7,700. Peer support training program, about $12,000. The lab supplies go with that Pro-E testing equipment that is underneath it. So those are the supplies for that equipment. And then earlier this year, the board approved purchasing these NARC devices that are being used in the sheriff's department to test drugs so that they provide protection, and Carrie can get into all of that. Before Carrie speaks, and I'll speak to page 2. So on this, I have broken it down into where the settlement money is coming from and what the settlement terms are that we are aware of. So distributors are paying out through 2038. Janssen, as I said, it front-end loaded theirs, and they start to pick up with about a $60,000 a year payment in 24, 20, or 25 or 26. Pharmacies, they just settled in 2023. Those payments started in 2024. That's a shorter payout period, but you can see where that extends down to 2037. A subtotal is the next column, and then estimates and bankruptcies. Kroger was just recently, the board approved to getting involved in the Kroger settlement. I ran some numbers on that. My original projections were a little bit higher, but I forgot to take out the legal fees, so I made those adjustments. I expect Kroger to be about 450 to 500,000. And again, the bankruptcies, I listed at the bottom who the distributors are, who the pharmacies are, the bankruptcies that we're aware of so far, and then Kroger was another one. So over the period of time from 2038, this is not factoring in any interest revenue. We're looking at about $16.2 million. The thing that is interesting, because it is a steady stream of money, as we expend funds, we have these future funds we know are coming in. So as decisions are being made, this helps to frame those decisions. But again, we still don't have answers. Because we don't know where some of these other, and then they pop up out of nowhere. Know that this particular place was in a bankruptcy filing until we get a notification on it. So these figures will be updated as we learn more. And Carrie's team can then work with the information as it comes forward. And I'll turn it over to Carrie, unless you have any questions. Do you have any questions on this? Yes.
Supervisor Garrison, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the finance director, Pat. So when we were looking at the cost of the reorg, and I asked, is the burn rate at least 5 years? It's way more than 5 years.
Yes.
Plenty.
Yes.
Saved.
Right, and we hadn't finished all of those projections yet, but we knew that the payouts were till 2038, and I think we did mention that there's revenue coming in through 2038.
Thank you. That answers my question.
My question would be, are we forced to spend any of this money in any type of timely fashion?
No, there's no timeline.
No timeline? Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, so when you look at the sheet that Patty had, look at the expenditures. I just wanted to provide a really brief summary of what those expenditures entailed. So as you would see, the opioid community prevention educator, and we can put together that high school training material goes with that. We are working with currently both Central and Wilmot High School to provide prevention classes, services, curriculum into the school. That position is also providing anti-stigma training to the community, has now formally entered into a relationship with Carthage College to provide the exact same curriculum to students in need. We're also providing the anti-stigma training to the RAs and the student athletes there. We anticipate extending that offer to both Parkside and Gateway, and we'll continue to try to develop a relationship with KUSD to offer that as well. So that's a very robust program going on. When you look into the peer support training, we did speak a lot with our MAT, or medically assisted treatment providers in our community, to ask what were the greatest barriers to accessing care and what was the greatest strength, what was the best support. And we heard a resounding that if we could have more peer support specialists available to those that are using drugs, they're the best indicator for successful recovery. So we decided to purchase peer support recovery training to grow that field here locally. Of course, the lab equipment and supplies were purchased for public health. That was something that was discussed on the need. What was happening prior to the purchase of this equipment was public health was sending out UAs, and it would take a 2-week turnaround to detect opioids in someone's urine before public health could start prescribing MAT services. So we're really prolonging people's engagement and services. So this sped that up, and accessibility truly increased. And then of course the supplies to run that machine. And then lastly, to talk about the drug detection devices. That's something that we discussed quite a bit at this committee, as well as the full board. So those have been purchased. If there's any questions, I will humbly ask for Chief Deputy Miller to reply to any of those questions. I'm so glad you stayed. So that's a summary of what we've purchased. I do want to share that we do have a plan on what to do in the future. We have really kind of come together as an opioid panel to talk about what should we do. But let's pause now, because just like Supervisor Gens had said, or had a question, we don't have a limit on this. And we hear how so much money we have. Let's pause now and be very strategic on what we're gonna do with this, the rest of our money. So we've talked with a marketing firm, Kane Communication. Kenosha County has had a contract with Kane Communication in the past. They have just wrapped up a research project at the state health services, and has also assisted Waukee Behavioral Health in kind of planning and strategic planning for funds, and actually a full 5-year strategic plan. So we're looking at doing a research project with Kane to do qualitative and quantitative research, meaning really reaching out to both the treatment community and our recovery community to do surveys, one-on-one interviews, listening sessions, and then do a tabletop analysis of what's happening around the state, what's available in our community. And also really Ohio is doing some pretty innovative things with their opioid settlement dollars, and do some analysis on like-sized communities in Ohio, really kind of pull the microscope back and pull that down, give a presentation to us on their findings, and then we can use that baseline to put together a strategic plan. So we can really use this as money and work with finance and other divisions and departments across Kenosha County. So we get the best use of this money.
Questions from the committee, comments?
I just have one question.
Supervisor Burkhoff.
What is this bottom item here? What's that?
The TrueNarc devices?
Yeah.
Those are the drug detection devices that were purchased for the sheriff's department to detect drugs. What was happening was there have been stories of law enforcement officers who have been exposed to fentanyl in the field during their normal course of work. And these detection devices are now more readily available to the Kenosha Sheriff's Department. This is a standard. When you look at what other counties have been doing across the state of Wisconsin, this has been purchased, this same item has been purchased for the safety of officers and everyone in their custody.
All right, thank you.
You through, Mr.
I'm done, thank you.
Supervisor Burkhoff? So in one breath, you said you had a plan, and then in the next breath, you said you're gonna be working on a plan. So where are we as far as that goes? So
Well,
we're putting together a strategic plan, or we have a plan, or what?
The plan is to put together
get a
all of
plan?
the information.
To get a plan?
The plan is
Okay.
to get involved in a research project. I would imagine that we're always going to be planning. We always have to evolve with the needs of the community. County government has to be the safety net for the private sector. So we are never going to stop planning on how we're going to best use this money. What we think is going to work for the next 5 years, we cannot sit on that and think that's going to do a really good job for this community in 10 years. So we have to constantly evolve. We have to constantly evolve with this.
But have you put together a plan to start with?
Yes, we have. I have met with Kane Communication to go over what our needs are for a research project. And I am hoping to get the finalized proposal of that. Our timeline right now is if we could start relatively quickly, the research project findings could be presented to us by the end of this year.
Where are we with, this was brought up at one meeting about working with the sheriff's department on having a mental health specialist. Where is that, you know?
So I've worked with Captain Klinkhammer quite a bit. We have put together a job description. We have submitted it to Human Resources. And so we're continuing to move forward to make sure that has the best chance to make it in the 25 budget.
Is there any way we can get any of this money to the sheriff's department for maybe, drug operations or anything like that?
So Exhibit E, and when you look at the paper in front of you, you'll see that under each description, it then has an italic Exhibit E with some explanations. That's where it's a document provided for all the settlement dollars through across this country on best practices. The guidelines to use for these dollars is for treatment or for prevention. And so the intended use of this money is pretty clear. That when we used it for TrueNarc, there is a portion of Exhibit E that talks about what you can use this money for first responders, and it is for the secondary trauma of mitigating the opioid crisis. So that was the rationale for that device. It was very clear. But for arrests, for keeping someone into custody, for prosecution, no. There is no language at all in Exhibit E that supports that.
Okay. Have you presented a plan to Human Services, to that committee? Well, I mean, what your goals are, where you're at with what you're trying to put together. I mean, do they have you talk about what I mean, we have a lot of money here.
We have talked about the opioid crisis in general. We have provided several presentations with public health, the medical examiner's office, and behavioral health. So yes, over the years, we've presented to them. It's not specific about the opioid dollars. It's about the problem at hand and what our strategies might be.
Yeah, I mean, I love prevention, but we got to figure out what the best way to do that is and get the money spent on that. But Supervisor Brookhouse, you have any questions?
I understand that there's some parameters here. What about the interest revenue? What can that be used for?
The interest revenue follows the program revenue in this case.
Okay.
That's good. Did somebody else have their hand? Did you?
I did. Carrie, what is the name of the committee? Opioid Task Force?
It's Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee. It's executive committee that I chair that.
Okay, so there is a committee that is looking at the use of these funds and recommendations are coming forward for the use of these funds.
All of everything that you see before you, all of these were brought in front of that committee and a recommendation was provided to the county executive.
Now, the funds cannot be expended unless they're in the budget, and they have been in the budget for the past 2 years. The funds that you see expended were budgeted funds that, the equipment that the sheriff's department, that was not in the budget. So a separate resolution came forward to purchase that. So again, the board governs the use of the funds. The recommendations come from the committee.
But the recommendations come from the committee to the county exec. But if the county exec doesn't think it's a good idea, but the board does.
Well, we haven't crossed that bridge.
Really?
Really.
I mean, the board has approved the budgeted funds that are there to be used. How those are used is usually at the discretion of the administration.
Okay. I just would hate to have something be a good idea and me not hear about it. But, okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you for presenting this to us.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yes, that's probably about on ways. We don't want to be first of all, we getting dollars for a time, but we also don't want to our end to every penny and not have anything that we're problem.
Yeah, okay, 1 second.
Like, these are recommended, like money. So, I mean, the information is.
Okay, medical examiner, report on toxicity, death, statistics and autopsy numbers. Again, this is part of our budget where we always budget number of autopsies and I thought with us talking about opioids, we could hear numbers presented to us regarding that. And I mean, I thought this was a piece that could kind of tie into what we were just talking about. So with the budget coming up and with us talking about opioids, why don't we hear about the nasty end result, shall we?
Yes, thank you for having me. Mary's Plant. So I have everything on PowerPoint, and I just want to preface this by letting you know that on the Kenosha County .org, the website where we have all of our different services listed, the medical examiner's office is on there And under the medical examiner's office, I update it usually like once to twice a month with all the stats. So everything can be found on there. Joe and I developed that a number of years ago to get those numbers on there because that was something I was getting calls about all the time from the media about, hey, what's the stats on this and what's the stats on that? So as you can see, our office, last year for 2023, we had 1,635 deaths. Those are all the deaths for Kenosha County. That includes, homicide, suicide, accident, natural, undetermined, hospice cases, all the deaths. It's not just overdose deaths or suspected overdose deaths. Just because our office is called out to a death does not mean that the person is going to undergo an autopsy. So there are certain parameters, and we're very conservative with our parameters of a person that needs to undergo an autopsy. So we contract with Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office to have a forensic autopsy performed. So last year we had 135 autopsies, with 3 of those going to Waukesha County. I'll get into that for pediatric forensic pathologist to perform those other 3 autopsies on children. We also perform external examinations where we still need to sign a death certificate. And, the person's death might be accident or natural, but we still need to take a look at that person and document everything and pull the medical records, pull police records, pull a whole bunch of different records, and then determine the cause and manner of death. Sometimes we do medical records reviews, as you can see on here, and these are done between myself and my chief deputy. And sometimes that's just like, okay, the person dies at home of natural causes, and they might not have seen a doctor in a number of years. Or the doctor can just say, I don't, even though they see the doctor just say, I don't want to sign it. So then we take over jurisdiction of that. So as you can see for last year, we had 328 death certificates that we signed. That includes the autopsies, the externals, medical record reviews, things like that. So that's just a quick overview. Now, with the people that we have perform an autopsy on, it's, as I mentioned, we have conservative criteria. And if we suspect that a person has died of an overdose, then that's automatically, we are having an autopsy performed. So last year in 2023, we had 58 confirmed overdose deaths. So that's, just about a little bit over half of our caseload for autopsies. And so, as I mentioned, we work with Milwaukee ME's office. Those autopsies are $1,800 each. For the, I think it's on the next one. If we can pull that, thank you, Aaron. If we need to have Milwaukee do an external exam with tox, because we need to roll tox in or out, that's kind of few and far between that we do those, but we still do those. Those are $900. And then the pediatric autopsies, they're about $5,000 or so. It's more of an a la carte menu because we're going through a special forensic pathologist to have those autopsies done. So unfortunately, if a child dies of an obvious death of like, okay, they were shot, they were run over by a car, like something, obvious of how they died, we still need to do an autopsy, but we're going to send that child to Milwaukee. When we have the other child deaths of, maybe it was bed sharing, or the just child dies suddenly, we don't know why, without a medical explanation, then we're going to put that over to the pediatric forensic pathologist to have the more specialized tests done. So that's where we are on that. And then, as I mentioned, we have, as you can go to the third, on the Kenosha County website that I update. Oh my gosh, it's really small in here. Sorry. But we have been kind of holding steady over the past couple of years. 2023 is not finalized. I have one pending death. But that is a child death, and those do take a lot longer to come back. The turnaround time for Milwaukee has increased. They've been able to hire additional forensic pathologists. So their turnaround time for the cause and manner of death has come down tremendously. So we've been having, our cases have been coming back faster and we're able to close those faster. So that's a positive. As for 2024, as you can see in here, we're at 20, but I actually just updated this morning and we're actually at 22. But a majority of those deaths, as you can see over the years, are due to opioids. And within that family of opioids are fentanyl or fentanyl analogs. But one of the things that have been popping up and becoming a more prominent figure is cocaine keeps popping up as a prominent drug. And then last year, xylazine was a front runner of the number of deaths that involve xylazine, which is a large animal tranquilizer, which is not fit for human consumption, but it's been put into the drugs. It's mixed into the drugs. One of the things that I do is I do go to the jail with the Kenosha County Health Department, and I work on the Living Free program. So I'm in the jail, I think it's every other month, for again, an hour with the men, an hour with the women, and I talk about drugs and what I'm seeing and things like that. So I'm trying to get the outreach out there too, in that way, because we were seeing a lot of people who were recently released from jail and then they died. There's a common theme that we're seeing. So now we're trying to do outreach before they get out of jail to have harm reduction and to try to lessen the number of deaths that way too. And I'm willing to go talk to anybody who wants me to come talk. So I'm willing to go out into the community. It's been a while because, you know, COVID and with that, but I'm willing to talk about death, dying, and drugs and things like that. So that's what I thought.
Do you have anything in the works with the high schools or anything like that, the schools? You go into maybe health classes? I mean, are you?
That's a tough nut to crack, especially with KUSD.
Pardon me?
That's a tough nut to crack, especially with KUSD, to try to get in there, and I haven't approached them, but that's also not the population that we're looking at either for drug overdose deaths, because I haven't broken down by age, and it's very few and far between that we have a teenager dying. But the most of the population that are dying of overdoses are between 30 and 60. And it's more concentrated between the ages of 50 and 60.
I get it. I was thinking more of the prevention thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
understand
I can see that too, like, yeah, doing like on
You know,
the back
I mean,
end of things too.
You know, you start to get those thoughts somewhere. So,
Yeah,
I mean, if it was up to me, I'd start in kindergarten, but you know, I mean, you just want to make sure drugs are, you know, people understand. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I was just wondering if that was ever something that you tried to approach
yeah.
schools with, just to come and talk about deaths due to drugs and what can happen if you do one stupid thing with something laced with fentanyl. What could happen?
I'm not sure how
So-
that, I'm very open with my own child. I mean, she's 10, but
Well,
that's just my kid, so.
yeah, you're also the medical examiner.
Yeah. Yeah, she hears it all.
What did, so now I'll switch and I'll just go to budget. What did we budget for the number of autopsies last year and how are we on budget?
I don't know.
I don't have those numbers in front
Yeah,
of
I
me.
don't think.
You have that, you look at that, Matt?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Question, Bryce, Bob?
So that's the reported Kenosha County. Is that Kenosha County residents and non-Kenosha County residents?
Yes,
That's a good question.
yes, thank you. So, yes, if a person dies in Kenosha County, so say for instance, a person has a medical event or an accident in Lake County, and then they are transported to usually to St. Cattle, Frederick, South Pleasant Prairie, and then they die here, then that becomes our jurisdiction. I don't have the ability to refer that death back over the state lines. I have called before and tried, and they did not take that. So, yeah, I can refer cases to another county, like if the person dies here, but they had like their incident in, like say Racine County, then I can refer the death back over to Racine County. I can refer death back to the place of incident all within Wisconsin, but over the state lines, I cannot.
Okay.
And I know that that has become an issue with the amount of people that have been moving here.
Yeah.
Because they'll keep what happens is they'll move here from the Chicagoland area, they'll be here, but then they keep their doctors in the Chicagoland area, but then they die here of natural causes. I have to then take that over because their doctor is not dual licensed. In both Wisconsin and Illinois, more times than not. And then also said if they have an incident in Lake County and then cross the state line and die here, then I have to take jurisdiction of that too.
Okay, and then, these deaths, whether it's drug or any other causes, are you able to look at that data that says, okay, this person is a Kenosha County resident and this person is not a non-Kenosha County resident? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we have a database. It's not very fancy. It's a database and I'm able to pull a lot of information. That is something that I could have RHB, that's they oversee our database, and that's something that I could have them pull. Or I could see if they could make not program, but be able to pull that data for me into a report.
Okay.
But yeah, that's something that has definitely, I can tell you, just has increased over the past couple of years. And with the closing of the one, was it Vista West that closed? So, and I know like there's a lot of problems with Vista East, and so a lot of things get diverted up here.
Okay. So yeah, Supervisor Brookhouse.
May I ask a question of the youth and governance?
Sure.
So in high school, what kind of messaging are you receiving about the dangers of drugs? Does the school provide teaching you this?
Last time we had something of that sort, it was just like in a standard like health or gym class. It would be very like great to have more education on especially like nicotine. People buy different vapes and cards from different students all across. It would be a really good idea to get more like advice and notification out there for kids that are unknown to what can happen to them if they purchase something of that kind.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm a student with Social Central, and semester, like you're only required one health semester, and like the unit, they talk about drugs because a semester is what, like 12 weeks? They cover about a week worth of drugs and that's about it. So information is so limited. And then I know like they'll have people come in and they'll be like, drugs are bad, like that's their slogan. And then it's gonna be like somebody skateboarding. Like it's so bad, like how they try to deliver the message. And like all of us are like sitting in this giant assembly and they're like, drugs are bad. This guy's gonna break a scooter or something. Like it is so bad how they present it to students. I wish they would do like more like information based than like having somebody famous come in and say like, oh, don't do drugs. And then,
famous,
yeah, I don't know, just somebody like with more fact based, like just to inform the students, not like a famous figure or something. Like, you know what I'm kind of saying? I don't know, assemblies, and then like students are kind of bored with assemblies as well.
The best we have is just drawing a poster that says, don't do drugs, be courageous or something.
Yeah. Like information is so limited in high school. Obviously, I wish that would be something more talked about because it is huge in high school.
So I'm not sure like how I would get in there. I mean, I don't know, so we can do with that.
But we do have our educators that we're funding through our opioid funds, who is doing bottom line skills in the high school. We just started that. So they will get much more education based on, and it's a long curriculum, several weeks worth of curriculum.
Okay, that's important. I mean, this might sound bad, but I was offered the hardest and the most serious drugs when I was in high school, in my whole life. Luckily, I didn't do them, but that being said, a lot of people I knew did. And I think prevention needs to start there. So, you know, hearing what these two young ladies just said is very disappointing. And not on you. I mean, I think, Rebecca, you could take that back, and I mean, I think, you know, maybe next month we should hear it, where that coordinator is or where that project is. Give us an update on that.
Touched on it a little bit. I mean, it's been a slow roll. We are out in the county schools. They've been much more open to have this training than KUSD has, but we're not giving up on KUSD. And then they just started rolling it out to some of the colleges, because again, that's where we're starting to see a lot of the issues. So that part of the prevention piece is there. I'm not saying we could do more, certainly, but we started.
Well, at least there's a plan and it's moving forward. So yeah, that's important. Anything else? Did you give me a number? Okay.
For 24, we had 157 autopsies and 4 pediatric.
That's what we budgeted?
24. Which comes to 302, 600.
So we're on budget. Okay, all right.
Right now, for 2024, we're at 62 autopsies. And I think one of those might be pediatric. I would have to double check. I think one is pediatric. So we're on the lower end. Okay.
All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for coming in and giving us this information. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, please feel free to give me a call or email me. Okay, thank you.
Sure. We're on 13, finance presentation of 2023 audit report.
So with us this evening is Erica Blumberg and Maureen Peterson from A&O, to present the audit and the single audit.
Oh, I'm Maureen, and I'm going to be talking about the first part of the audit. On page 1, it starts with the auditor's opinion. Again, this year they gave us a clean opinion. Good. Under responsibilities of management and financial statements, this talks about that it's management's responsibility to prepare the financial statements, which we do. We prepare the financial statements and then we give them to CLA for their review. And we keep in contact with CLA throughout the year to make sure that if there's any issues that come up, they can answer our questions. So then our audit process is pretty smooth because they know that they can trust our product that we're giving them. On page 4 is the management's discussion and analysis. And this is something that I really like. It gives a high level view of the finances, and it also kind of explains how to read the financial statements and why a government financial statements is put together the way it is. So I really suggest you read that. I think it's really good information. This talks about the countywide statements and how the government funds are converted to full accrual in the countywide statements. In the fund statements after the countywide government financial statements are modified accrual, which the focus is on how money flows through the funds, so that you have an idea of the resources that are available in the near term. So in the fund statements, capital assets are expenditures rather than assets. And the countywide statements reclasses them to assets, and then it also shows long-term liabilities. So this gives a long-term view of the government funds. If you go to page 10, there's some graphs here that give a really good representation of how the expenses and revenues are broken down. The first graph shows the governmental funds. It shows them by service type. The first bar is the expenses. Then the second bar is the program revenue that goes along with those expenses. So you get a graph representation of expenses and their revenues. And then the next graph below that is entirely revenues that
this is the first one is the governmental revenues. As you'll see here, the 42% comes from grants, and then 38% is for property taxes. That's the bulk of the revenue going to the governmental funds. The next page shows the business type activities. Same thing with the graph here. It shows expenses and then corresponding revenues. And then below, because business type funds are set up to use minimal levy, you'll see here that the majority of the revenues are charged for services, with then 39% being from grants, and then only 3% to property tax. And then there's a graph on the next page. This is the progression of the unassigned general fund balance as a percentage of the expenditures. And our target for the last few years has been 30%. And again, we met that target. We're at 32% this year. And if you go to 14, that shows how we come up with that percentage. This is the general fund statement that you're used to seeing every month from Barna. At the bottom here, it shows how we come up with that 32% calculation. And then the financial statements start on page 19. The first financial statement, and then these are the government-wide, where the government activities are reclassified to look more like business type activities. So you'll see here that under the government activities, you have capital assets of 269 million. There's also long-term liabilities of 208 million listed. So then your net position for government activities is 146.9 million. Total net position is 165.3 million, with the largest portion of that coming from capital assets net of debt. So that's 138 million. And then your restricted net position is 3.4 million, leaving 19.9 million of unrestricted overall. And on page 20, you'll see the statement of activities. And this is set up so that this is like those graphs. This is set up so the first column is your expenses, and it's broken down by the different government activities and then also the business type activities, the three business funds that we have. So the expenses are in the first column, and then the next three columns show the revenue that correspond to those activities. And then down in the middle, you'll see that the general revenue, which is taxes, and that isn't specific to a particular department. So overall, the change of net position was 21 million, which when added to the net position from the beginning, we get to the 165.3 ending net position. Now Erica's going to talk about the actual fund statements.
Thanks. Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, Erica Bloomberg worked with Maureen on the financial statements and just in finance in general. So like she said, the governmental and business type fund financial statements present a lot more detail than the government-wide statements, and they present things on a much more current basis. So here's where we get into like the fund balances and what you've got available for next year and you know, what's kind of currently due and payable. So starting on page 21, we've got your governmental funds. So these are, as Maureen said, the ones that are more publicly funded, mostly funded by taxes or general types of revenue. So obviously your general fund is the big one. That's a major fund. That's what most of the county's activity runs through. So general fund at the end of 23 had $79.2 million in current assets. Most of that is in cash, and then property taxes levied that are going to be received in the next year. You also have your shorter term liabilities there of about 8.9 million. So, and offsetting the property tax receivable that's due and payable, but is set aside to be used in the next year. So you would kind of back that off of your total assets to get to your total fund balance for the general fund of 34.867 million. And as Maureen pointed out, 26.4 or 26.5 of that is free and clear, if you will. It's unrestricted, it's available for use. And that does represent about 32% of the annual operating expenditures of the general fund, which is well above the actual policy minimum of 17%. So you're definitely, we're well above that, and it's often, or also above the target of 30%. The remainder of that fund balance is restricted or non-spendable for different purposes. Largely what the assigned part is set aside, it's already designated for certain subsequent year expenditures or capital projects. There's two other major funds. So the major funds capture the bulk of the activity. They're the most significant funds, human services and debt service. And then all the rest of the funds are kind of lumped together here in this non-major governmental funds column. I'll talk about, there's a separate schedule that we can get into a little bit later that has the details of all of those. But the total non-major funds had $27 million in assets, mostly in cash, and $16 million net of any current liabilities. Most of that is restricted or assigned, largely for, again, subsequent year expenditures, capital projects, or other restricted purposes of the different funds. So you'll see the opioid money that you're just discussing is set aside as restricted in a separate fund. Page 22 just reconciles the two balance sheets. The one Maureen talked about with the one that I just talked about, shows what specifically those differences are. Page 23, we get into the income and expenditures for the major funds and the non-major funds. So the general fund for 23, total revenues of 79.3 million, total expenses of 80.7 million. So a net deficiency in the general fund, but that's offset by overages and other funds. For those that were here at the April meeting, the Human Services Fund and a few other funds that have remaining balances lapse that back into the general fund at the end of the year, funds that they didn't need. So ultimately, the general fund increased after all of that by 900,000. Additionally, the general fund did transfer out $2.2 million at the end of the year into the Human Services Building Fund, which is an internal services fund, building up that reserve for the new building that is in progress. Human Services Fund had the bulk of that excess, brought in $75 million, spent $71 million, so about $4.2 million left over in that fund lapsed back into the general fund at the end of the year. Debt service is pretty much a break-even type fund. You've got your taxes and premiums that offset the required debt service expenditures. So overall, net fund balance changed for the county as a whole for governmental activities by $3.2 million, increased by that amount. And again, on page 24, there's a reconciliation of that income statement to the statement of activities that Maureen discussed. So you can see why the two statements are different. On page 25, we get into some further detail on the general fund. Just takes by function revenues and expenditures, compares that to your budget for the year. You see that overall for expenditures, right in line with budget after the year-end adjustments to the budget. So $94,000 under budget at the end of 2023 for the general fund. And then we have a similar statement on page 26 for Human Services Fund. So those statements are required for certain types of governmental funds. You don't have to present it for the debt service funds, only what the general fund and then major special revenue funds. So funds that have certain set aside revenue sources. So that's why there's only two of those statements there. After that, we have a detail on the proprietary funds. So these are what Maureen described as the more business type. They're mostly covered by fees and charges for services. So these statements actually are going to mirror. There's no reconciliation between these and the front statements because the basis of accounting is exactly the same. We just have more detail here on these by fund. So the funds included here are the Brookside, the highway fund, the golf course fund, and then some internal service funds. In total, the business type or the proprietary funds had current assets of $13 million, capital assets of $34 million, some deferred outflows of resources related to pensions of $16 million. Subtract off of that the long and short-term debt, which includes $14 million of the Brookside debt, which is currently in repayment. And then page 28 is where you have the net ending net position for each of the funds. So in total, business type activities had 18.4 million net position at the end of the year. Brookside was in a deficit position of 2.388. But if you look at page 29, you see that it's actually a decreased deficit, an increase. It's less negative than it was the year before. So Brookside had net operating loss of $973,000. Of that loss, $770,000 was non-cash depreciation. So Brookside came pretty close to break even in operations for the year. They do have some property tax funding, some other miscellaneous revenue sources that really kind of made it pretty close to a wash outside of interest charges. There was some transfer in of bond money and only 200,000 or so of ARPA money to cover some projects there. So after all of that, Brookside fund balance actually increased, or I'm sorry, net position increased by just over $1 million for the year. Highway fund had a change in that position of 2.6 million. That is largely funded by grants. 19.6 million of the projects are funded by grants. And then otherwise by various transfers in some ARPA money went into the highway fund for some projects there, and then bonding money there. And then golf course netted 670,000. The golf course fund netted 670,000 increase for the year. And then the last proprietary fund statement is on pages 30 to 31. It's a statement of cash flows. This just gives a little bit more, a cleaner picture of the cash ins and the outs, taking out depreciation and all the non-cash types of expenses. So you can see really where the money came from and went to in these funds. So Brookside actually had a net positive 785,000 of operating cash flows. The golf course had 2.398 million positive cash flows. And then you can see the other sources and uses below, capital and financing type receipts and disbursements there. And then the last of the fund financial statements are on pages 32 and 33. So Kenosha County, in addition to holding its own money, holds about $11 million on behalf of other entities. The other entities are part of the county. Largely, it's mostly the courts, the clerk of courts, holding bail money, holding fees and fines are collected, and then you go out to other entities. So those type of funds that don't belong to the county, but that you're holding at year end, $11 million there. And page 33 shows sort of the ins and the outs of these funds. After that, we get into the footnotes, which is a great place to just find additional information, details about all the balances in the financial statements. There's nothing really new and unusual in the footnotes, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. I will point out a few of the more significant notes. So if we look at page 60, you've got details on capital assets for the counties. You can see balances broken down a little bit more by categories, how much is buildings, how much is your infrastructure, increases and decreases there, as well as depreciation. And there are separate schedules for your governmental and your business type activities there. On page 65 is detail of the transfers between and among the funds. So we have all those transfers listed out at the bottom of the schedules I talked about. Here provide detail on where money went in between the funds and what the purpose of those transfers was. And then the next page gives all the breakdown on the county's long-term debt, the bonds. List out all the different issuances that are out there, as well as the payment schedule, when payments are coming due, principal and interest. Overall, the county's debt decreased from 22 to 23 by just under $1.9 million, 1.879 is what I calculated. So you can see those changes there. And then the last kind of more significant notes begin on page 71, just a lot of detail about pensions and retirement obligations. Those are really big numbers on the financial statements. They're actuarially determined numbers. They're very long-term. They're a little bit more abstract numbers. So this is a good place to get an understanding of those numbers and what goes into calculating those numbers. All of that information does come from external actuaries and largely through the state, through the public pension system. So that is it for the footnotes. I will just draw your attention quickly to, if you go to page 106, I mentioned that you have the additional detail on all those, what we call non-major funds. There's definitely a very strict criteria for what considered major and non-major. So it's all based on total assets and liabilities and income and expenses of the fund. So basically your smaller funds, you have less activity. Couple notable funds, you were discussing the opioid money. There's a separate fund set aside for that. So you can see at the end of 23, there was $2.2 million sitting there. Obviously there's been a lot of activity so far in 24, money coming in there. New fund this year on page 106, the Human Services Building Grant Fund. So the grant agreement for construction on that's kind of flowing through the county, that's being set aside in a separate fund at the end of 23. As of the end of 23, it had received 4 million of that so far and spent just under $1 million. So you're at 3.1 million sitting there at the end of 2023. And that's separate from the reserves that the county is building up. This is really kind of like a pass-through type situation. And then also we have 3.5 million left in ARPA money at the end of 2023, which should all be pretty much spent and committed by the end of 2024. So yep. And then, so that's the balance sheet for those funds. The income statement for, I'm sorry, if I go to page 110, additional information on the remaining non-major funds, which is primarily the capital projects fund. So accounting for all of your, other than highway, and any specific types of projects, largely all of your capital projects are running through this general capital projects fund. So the bond money comes in here and then it either gets spent from here, it gets dispersed out to the other funds from that fund. And then beginning on page 109, you have the income statement for those individual funds. So again, you can see as Patty mentioned, about 500,000 came into the opioid fund in 23. Got details on the health department fund, which doesn't keep any money at the end of the year. That's one of those that lapses into the general fund. They just had a small surplus, 199,000 that went back into the general fund. And then again, the grant fund, the 4 million coming in, and then we used 7.1 million of ARPA funds in 2023. So that amount is recognized in revenue there. Page 111 has the internal service funds. So these are funds that are providing services to other funds in the county or to the county as a whole. There's 3 of them relate to insurance reserves that are set aside. And then the other is the human services building. So, rents and upkeep of that building are accounted for in this fund, and this is where the reserve is being built up for the new building. So we've got, at the end of the year, unrestricted net position in that fund of $4.25 million set aside for that project. And then the health insurance reserve, we would retain $1.5 million in that fund. I think that's pretty much all that I wanted to touch on the financial statements. There's one additional report at the very end, which is also a really great, clean opinion. That's the auditors. They don't issue a formal opinion, but they do report that there are no findings in internal controls or compliance with respect to the financial statements. And that goes a long way towards the bond rating. It goes towards, giving the public assurance that the financial statements, not just the financial statements, but the financial system is set up in a way that is going to ensure transparent and complete and accurate financial information that's being put out. So that's a really great, and that's very typical. The county has not had findings for memorable history as far as I know. So that is it on the basic, the countywide financial statements. I know I talked really fast. Are there questions before I touch on the single audit piece? Okay, great. So then the last piece of the audit, the auditors do come in, and the county obviously receives a lot of federal and state funding. Those are subject to very strict compliance requirements. And so because of the amount that the county received, the auditors have to do some separate testing. The CABA representative talked about their single audit. The county also undergoes a single audit. And so to begin, again, just like the financial statements, they've issued a clean single audit opinion on the SEPA, the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, and the expenditures of state awards. Also, no findings on compliance related to the major programs they tested, no findings on internal controls over compliance related to the programs that they tested. So again, a very good, clean opinion on the county's handling of federal and state funding that is coming through. So the financial reports that go along with this are first we call it the SEPA, the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, lists out all the different federal funding by source, by pass-through, where it's coming from, identified by assistance listing number, and the total revenues and expenses for the year. So the total, and you can see it's a very long list, and each of these grants has people monitoring and overseeing and making sure that it's being spent in compliance with the requirements. But page 9 has the total there. So the county received in total $40.5 million of or recognized revenues or expenditures of $40.5 million in 2023 of federal funding. And then likewise, state funding on page 14, you can see the total $23.5 million of funding through the state. And again, in a single audit, just like in a financial statement audit, they're not looking at every single program every year. They have usually a rotating cycle of what they call major programs, and that's again based on very specific criteria and calculations. But if you look at page 19, you can see the specific programs that they did test this year. Largely their programs to the Human Services Department, that's where the bulk of the funding is, but they also tested the ARPA money this year, as well as about 10 different state programs. So pages 18 through the remainder of the report are basically the auditors' results, which read down the list: unmodified opinion, no findings, no internal control findings. The county qualifies as a low-risk auditee, which means that we've basically been in compliance for quite some time, haven't had findings in the past, so the risk that the auditors assigned to auditing the county is pretty low. They don't come in thinking there's gonna be a lot that is, wrong because they haven't found that in the past, so. That is it. So overall, a very good report for 2023, from the auditors, and, that was a lot of pages of numbers, in, maybe a little bit too much time, but, happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Do you have any questions? So, do you remember when we last had any type of issue with one of our audits?
Well, actually, we did have a finding on the single audit 2022. It was for 2021. It had to do with, having a second sign off on reporting for federal grants. And there were 3 instances that had occurred, which elevated it to a level of finding. So that was reported as such. It didn't change our low risk category because of the type of finding. It wasn't that it was a misuse of funds or anything like that. It was a reporting issue. So we've not had that since we had procedures in place, but due to some staffing turnover and some other situations, they were not followed as they should have been. Staff was retrained, reminded of our procedures, and that is not correct.
I recall that was the ARPA,
Correct. That was one of them.
one of the few.
One of the.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Those, we took care of that already, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Clara, Human Services report.
Good evening, this should be relatively brief. Claire Tapper, Director of Human Resources. So on occasion, we look to reclassify a position, and under our policy, if it is reclassified to the same or lower pay grade, with approval of Finance Director, HR Director, then we simply report it to the Finance Administration Committee. So that's what I'm doing this evening. We are reclassifying the lead child support specialist / safety coordinator that was added to the 2024 budget. So we're going to classify it as a child support specialist / safety coordinator. So from a lead to a regular child support specialist, the lead was in a pay grade of NE 10. The child support specialist is an NE 8. This is a fully grant funded position. Again, that was added in 2024. For recruitment purposes, the child support division is seeking to lower that pay grade to fill the role. And Assistant Director of Human Services is here to answer any particular questions regarding it. But basically, they initially envisioned having an experienced child support specialist that they would bring in and train in the area of domestic violence survivor services. That was the aim for this position. The grant funding was specific to that type of claimant, making sure that they are able to get into the system and feel safe and have the services that they need with those considerations revolving around that. They're going to take the approach of bringing in someone. They believe they'll have better luck bringing in someone with that type of background and then training in child support services. So that's why they want to lower the classification. So this is just a report to the committee, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on that? So do we have anybody in that position?
No.
Or we're just advertising for it, going out to get it? Okay, all right. Okay. See nothing, thank you.
Thank you.
And the general fund balance report?
Assistant Budget Director Matt, so will be presenting tonight, so Carmen is on vacation.
Hello, Matt.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. the part of my raspy voice. It seems like every time I present to you guys, I get sick or something. I promise it's not you guys, it's me. Yeah, I'll be presenting tonight, substitute for Barna. He didn't take me with him on his vacation, so I'll be on when he gets back. But, and I also promised Patty I'd do this in 45 minutes or less.
I know that's a false statement.
So not much activity from last month. You'll notice that this month has 2 columns versus last month we have 2 months of data. You want to show the prior month and then the current month. And in Barna fashion, I'll direct you to the bottom of it, of the report. Overall, not much change. We're showing a change to the general fund of about a $365,000 decrease projected as of now. That still puts us at that 30% of general fund expenditure range. It's a slight decrease from last month. To note, we're also only about 0.5% variance from the general fund expenditure, so we're projecting almost break even in that sense. If you go up to the top, I'll just run through the line items that actually caused that change from the previous month. The first 4 had no change. I can go into detail what those ones are, but I'll just skip to the 5th one. The circuit court, county clerk register of deed revenue surplus did increase a little bit by 75,000, mostly in relation to the bond defaults for the county. They're higher than they were last month. We saw a slight decrease in the reserves for tax delinquencies of about 15,000 there. And then our vacancy surplus also had a small decrease of 50,000. As we move forward in the year, those numbers get firmer, but that's what we're showing projected as of now. You skip to the bottom then, our sheriff operating expenditure deficit is increasing a little bit. That's in relation to, again, the overtime, some other factors are inmate medical and pharmaceutical costs, and I would say various other expenses for the detention, such as food and gas. Conveyance is up as well. Sales tax revenue deficit, we bumped that up a little bit by 100,000. We're trending flat with 2023. We're just below the budget of last year. Slow revenue for 2024, and it's a statewide issue, but we're going to continue to monitor that as the time goes on, and that'll factor into 25's budget as well. And then the final change from last month is our health insurance. The deficit, we backpedaled a little bit. The main driver for the health insurance deficit is prescriptions. We're looking at those. We've had meetings with HR and our provider. So we're looking at some changes there, but overall it's pretty steady. So again, overall, about 140,000 change from last month. That's all I've got.
Any questions or comments on the general fund report? Thank you. Raspy voice and all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other reports? Seeing none? Motion to adjourn by Supervisor Nato. Seconded by Supervisor Gearston. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody want to stay?
Aye. Last night, we went to, you heard.
Yeah, this was only
After 11.
Yeah.